The crisp autumn air outside did nothing to cool the simmering heat in the Buckhead Cafe. 17-year-old Darius Jackson stood accused, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it all. The manager, a woman with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Karen, pointed a perfectly manicured finger at him. "He was harassing customers," she declared, her voice ringing with performative certainty. "He refused to leave. I had no choice but to call the police." The officer, a burly man whose presence filled the small space, looked from Karen to Darius, his expression already one of bored conviction. Darius just wanted to get a coffee before his AP Physics study group. Now, he was the center of a spectacle, the whispers of patrons and the glint of phone cameras painting him as a threat he never was. He looked at the officer, then at Karen, a slow burn of indignation rising in his chest. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The aroma of freshly ground espresso beans usually calmed Darius Jackson. It was the scent of late-night study sessions, of quiet mornings with his dad before he deployed, of intellectual debates with his friends. But on this crisp October afternoon at The Daily Grind, a trendy minimalist coffee shop in the heart of Atlanta's affluent Buckhead neighborhood, the smell was soured by the bitter taste of accusation. He'd been waiting for his friends, Amir and Chloe, scrolling through his physics notes on his tablet. He'd ordered a caramel macchiato and found a small table near the window. It had been peaceful for all of 10 minutes. Then, the manager approached. "Excuse me," she began, her tone a thin veneer of politeness stretched over a solid core of suspicion. "Are you going to order anything else?" Darius looked up from his tablet, confused. "I already did, a caramel macchiato." He gestured to the half-empty cup on the table. The manager, Karen, glanced at the cup, and then back at him, her eyes narrowing. "I'm going to have to ask you to either purchase another item or leave. We have a policy. This is a business, not a library for people to just loiter." The word people hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Darius, clad in a hoodie from his high school's robotics club and a pair of new Jordans, felt a familiar, weary pang. He looked around. Several other patrons, all white, were engrossed in their laptops, some with empty cups, one with just a glass of water. None of them were being approached. "I'm waiting for my friends," Darius explained, keeping his voice even. "They'll be here any minute. We're having a study group." "That's what they all say," Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "I need you to free up the table, now!" The confrontation was starting to draw looks. A woman with a yoga mat tucked under her arm paused to watch. A man in a business suit lowered his newspaper. The temperature in the room seemed to rise. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm a paying customer," Darius said, his voice firmer now. The injustice of it was a hot coal in his stomach. "I have a right to be here. I'll leave when my friends arrive and we decide to go." Karen's face hardened, her polite mask crumbling completely. "Right? You people come in here and think you have the right to do whatever you want. I'm calling security." She turned on her heel and marched towards the counter, grabbing the phone. Within minutes, it wasn't a mall cop who arrived, but 2 Atlanta PD officers. One was a younger, tense-looking officer. The other was older, heavier, with a thick mustache and a world-weary sigh that seemed to be his default expression. This was Officer Miller. "What's the problem here?" Miller asked, his gaze sweeping over Darius, instantly cataloging him. Black teenager, hoodie, expensive sneakers. The calculus was immediate and damning. "This young man was loitering and harassing my customers," Karen announced, her voice pitched for maximum drama. "He refused to leave when I asked him to. I felt threatened." "Harassing who?" Darius shot back, standing up. His chair scraped against the polished concrete floor. "I haven't spoken to anyone but you. Threatened? I'm sitting here with a textbook." He held up his tablet, displaying the complex equations. "See? He's aggressive." Karen said, shrinking back theatrically. By now, phones were out. A young woman, sitting by the window, had her screen angled perfectly, the red recording dot glowing discreetly. The hashtag #TroyCoffeeShopKaren was already forming in her mind. Officer Miller ignored Darius's tablet. "Son, you were asked to leave the property by the manager. That makes this trespassing. You need to come with us." "For what?" "For studying while black." The words were out before Darius could stop them. His mother, a civil rights attorney, had always coached him on how to handle these encounters. Stay calm, be polite, state your name, don't argue. But the blatant unfairness was suffocating. The officer's face darkened. "That's enough of that. You're causing a scene. Hands behind your back." Darius felt a surge of panic. This couldn't be happening. His friends Amir and Chloe burst through the door at that exact moment, their cheerful chatter dying in their throats as they took in the scene. "Darius, what's going on?" Chloe gasped. "He's being arrested," a bystander whispered loudly. As Officer Miller pushed him toward the door, his hands cuffed behind him, Darius looked back at Karen. Her face was a mask of smug vindication. He saw the phones, the shocked and curious faces of the other customers. The humiliation was a physical blow, worse than any punch. He was being paraded out of a coffee shop like a criminal, his only crime the color of his skin in a space that had already judged him guilty. The video hit social media before Darius even reached the precinct. The clip, shot from a perfect angle, captured Karen's condescending tone, Darius's calm but firm defense, and the officer's immediate escalation. It showed him pointing to his physics notes. It showed his friends arriving in shock. The caption was simple. "Just trying to study in Buckhead. Living while black. The daily grind." Within an hour, it had 1,000 retweets. By the time Darius was sitting in a holding cell, the stark reality of his situation sinking in, the video was on its way to 1 million views. The grind of injustice had just begun. The holding cell was a symphony of miserable sounds, the drip of a leaky pipe, the distant clang of a steel door, the low mumbling of a man in the adjacent cell. For Darius, the loudest sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart. He sat on the cold, unforgiving bench, replaying the scene at the daily grind in a torturous loop. Each time, the disbelief sharpened into a fresh stab of anger and humiliation. He was a good kid, a straight-A student, captain of the robotics team, a volunteer at the local community center. He had a clear vision for his future. Georgia Tech, then a career in aerospace engineering. Nowhere in that meticulously planned trajectory was there a box for arrested for trespassing in a coffee shop. His mother, Lena Jackson, arrived like a force of nature. She was a partner at one of Atlanta's most respected civil rights law firms, and she entered the precinct with an aura of controlled fury that made even the jaded desk sergeant sit up straight. Her heels clicked with sharp prosecutorial authority on the linoleum floor. "I am here for Darius Jackson," she announced, her voice calm but resonant with power. "And I want to know, on the record, the probable cause for his arrest." Darius was released into her custody less than 20 minutes later. The car ride home was thick with a silence that felt heavier than any lecture. Lena's hands were clenched on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She didn't speak until they were inside their comfortable, book-lined home in a leafy Grant Park neighborhood. "Tell me everything," she said, her lawyer mode fully activated. Darius recounted the story, his voice cracking at times. As he spoke, his father, Colonel Michael Jackson, appeared on a video call from his post in Germany. His face, usually a source of strength and calm for Darius, was tight with a mixture of rage and helplessness. "Are you okay, son?" Colonel Jackson asked, his voice gravelly. "Did they hurt you?" "No, Dad, I'm okay, just angry." "Good. Stay angry," his father said. a surprising intensity in his eyes. "Anger is fuel. Your mother will know how to aim it." Meanwhile, the viral verdict was being delivered online. The video had exploded. The Daily Grind and Justice for Darius were trending nationwide. The coffee shop's Yelp and Google review pages were being carpet-bombed with one-star ratings and scathing comments. The clip had been picked up by local news, then national outlets. The Daily Grind's corporate office, a massive, soulless entity based in Seattle, was suddenly caught in a Category 5 social media hurricane. Their first response was a masterclass in corporate ineptitude. A bland, templated statement was posted to their Twitter account. "We are aware of the incident at our Atlanta location and are looking into it. The Daily Grind is committed to creating a welcoming environment for all our customers." The internet's response was swift and brutal. Memes appeared, superimposing Karen's face onto historical villains. Influencers and celebrities began sharing the video, adding their own commentary. LeBron James tweeted, "Are we still doing this? A kid can't even study for a physics test? Do better. Hunt your justice for Darius." The pressure was immense. The Daily Grind stock took a small but noticeable dip in after-hours trading. The corporate office, realizing their generic statement was like throwing a Dixie cup of water on a forest fire, went into panic mode. They issued a second, more specific statement, announcing that the manager, Karen, had been suspended pending a full investigation. For Darius, the support was a strange, disembodying experience. He was a hashtag, a symbol. People who had never met him were passionately defending him. But it also felt invasive. His face was everywhere. Pundits were debating his character on cable news. Strangers were dissecting his tone of voice, his clothes, his right to exist in a public space. Lena Jackson, however, saw the public outcry for what it was: leverage. She spent the night on the phone with her partners, with media contacts, with community organizers. She wasn't just fighting a trespassing charge anymore. This was bigger. This was about a pattern, a policy, an attitude that saw her son as a threat before he even opened his mouth. "The charge is bogus, Darius. We'll get it thrown out," she told him, her eyes alight with strategic fire. "But we're not stopping there. This isn't just about you. It's about every other kid who looks like you. The Daily Grind is going to learn a lesson, and so is the Atlanta Police Department." The charges filed against him were criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. The officer who made the arrest, Officer Miller, had written in his report that Darius was loud, aggressive, and causing a public disturbance. It was a complete fabrication, a narrative constructed to justify an unjust arrest. Late that night, Darius lay in bed, the blue light of his phone illuminating his face. He scrolled through the endless stream of comments and news articles. He saw a picture of himself being led away in cuffs, his face a mixture of shock and defiance. It felt like looking at a stranger. The world now saw him as a victim, a cause. But inside, he just felt like a kid who wanted a coffee. A kid who had followed all the rules his parents had laid out for him. Rules designed to keep him safe in a world that was predisposed to see him as a danger. And none of it had mattered. The system his mother fought against every day had come for him anyway. He closed his eyes, the anger his father spoke of solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. They had picked the wrong kid. They had picked the wrong family. The Fulton County Courthouse was an imposing granite structure, a place where justice was supposed to be blind, but where Lena Jackson knew it often peaked. She walked beside Darius, her hand resting reassuringly on his shoulder. They navigated the security checkpoint and the echoing marble hallways, their footsteps joining the somber rhythm of the court. Darius wore a charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a tie his father had taught him to knot over a video call. He looked less like a teenage robotics whiz and more like a young man preparing for battle. Lena had waived the arraignment, pleading not guilty on his behalf. Today was the preliminary hearing, a chance for the judge to hear the initial evidence and decide if there was enough probable cause to proceed to a full trial. It was often a formality, a procedural stepping stone. But Lena planned to make it a spectacle. Their case was assigned to Judge Thompson, a veteran jurist known for his no-nonsense demeanor and his low tolerance for frivolous cases. Lena saw this as an advantage. If she could expose the frivolity of the charges here and now, Thompson might just dismiss them outright. They sat at the defendant's table. Darius's leg bounced nervously under the table. Lena placed a calming hand on his knee. "Breathe," she whispered. "We are in the right. Never forget that." The prosecutor, a young, ambitious assistant district attorney named Mark Levine, looked confident. He likely saw this as an open and shut case, a business owner's complaint, a non-compliant suspect, a routine arrest. He probably hadn't even watched the full viral video, relying instead on Officer Miller's police report. First on the stand for the prosecution was Karen. She had traded her manager's polo for a conservative gray blouse, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like a pillar of the community, not a viral villain. She recounted her version of events, painting Darius as a menacing figure who occupied a table for an unreasonable amount of time and became belligerent and hostile when confronted. "I feared for my safety and the safety of my customers," she said, dabbing at a non-existent tear with a tissue. Levine handled her with kid gloves. "So, in your professional judgment, he was a threat?" "Absolutely," Karen confirmed. Then it was Lena's turn to cross-examine. She approached the witness stand, her movements deliberate and focused. "Miss Peterson," Lena began, her voice even and polite. "You stated that my son was occupying a table for an unreasonable amount of time. What is the Daily Grind's official policy on how long a paying customer can remain in your establishment?" Karen shifted. "Well, we don't have a specific time limit, but it's an unspoken rule." "An unspoken rule?" Lena's eyebrow arched. "A rule that is not written down, not posted anywhere for customers to see? A rule that is enforced at the sole discretion of the manager on duty?" "I use my judgment," Karen said defensively. "I see. And on that day, October 2nd, did you use your judgment to ask any other patrons to leave? For instance, the gentleman in the corner who had been there since you started your shift, working on his laptop with only a bottle of water?" Karen's face flushed. I don't recall." "You don't recall? Or you didn't ask him? The man who, according to a sworn affidavit from another customer, was a white man?" "Objection!" Levine called out, jumping to his feet. "Relevance?" "Your Honor, it is entirely relevant to establish a pattern of discriminatory enforcement of a non-existent policy," Lena countered smoothly. "I'll allow it. Answer the question, Ms. Peterson," Judge Thompson grumbled. Karen stammered. "I did not ask anyone else to leave." Lena continued, relentless. "So you singled out my son, a black teenager. You testified that he was harassing customers. Can you name a single customer he spoke to other than yourself? His body language was aggressive. He was intimidating." "Intimidating? My 17-year-old son, who is 5'9" and weighs 150 pounds, was intimidating you while sitting at a table reading a physics textbook on his tablet. Is that your testimony?" The courtroom was silent. Karen's carefully constructed victimhood was beginning to crumble. Next, the prosecution called Officer Miller to the stand. He strode in, his uniform crisp, his posture radiating authority. He repeated the narrative from his police report, using phrases like escalating situation, non-compliant subject, and ensuring public safety. He claimed Darius had yelled and used profanity, which Levine emphasized as the basis for the disorderly conduct charge. "Officer Miller," Levine asked, "based on your 20 years of experience, was the defendant's conduct disorderly?" "Yes, sir. He was causing a scene, agitating the other customers, and refusing to obey a lawful order to vacate the premises." Darius seethed. It was a lie. A complete, bald-faced lie, delivered under oath. He felt a surge of rage so pure it almost made him dizzy. He looked at his mother. She remained preternaturally calm, watching Officer Miller with an unnerving stillness. She was letting him build his own trap. When it was her turn, Lena approached the stand with a folder in her hand. "Officer Miller," she began, "you stated in your sworn report, and you've testified today, that my son was yelling and using profanity. Is that correct?" "That is correct, ma'am." "And this behavior justified the disorderly conduct charge?" "Among other things, yes." Lena opened the folder. "Your Honor, I would like to enter into evidence a digital recording. It is the video taken by another patron, which I believe the court is aware has been widely circulated. Crucially, this video has high-quality audio and begins before Officer Miller even entered the coffee shop." Levine objected, arguing it was just a snippet from social media, but Lena had already had the raw file authenticated by a forensic expert. Judge Thompson, his expression now one of deep interest, allowed it. The video played on the large screens in the courtroom. The audio was crystal clear. The entire exchange played out. Karen's demand, Darius's calm and logical responses. There was no yelling from him, no profanity. Then Officer Miller entered the frame. His voice was the one that escalated the situation. His commands were the ones that were loud and aggressive. The video ended with Darius being led away in handcuffs. The footage was damning. It directly contradicted Officer Miller's sworn testimony and his official report. The courtroom was utterly still, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Officer Miller's face was a stony mask, but a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Lena let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before she spoke. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. "Would you like to revise your testimony?" The power dynamic in the courtroom had just been irrevocably altered. The foundation of the prosecution's case had cracked wide open. Darius felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Hope. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Officer Miller sat rigid in the witness box, his face flushed, the video's clear audio echoing in the silent room, a stark rebuttal to his sworn testimony. Lena Jackson stood before him, poised and unflinching, the very picture of righteous indignation. "Officer Miller," Lena repeated, her voice cutting through the silence. "The court has just seen and heard evidence that directly contradicts your testimony. I ask you again, would you like to revise your statement that my son was yelling, using profanity, and acting in a disorderly manner?" Miller's jaw tightened. He shot a desperate look at the prosecutor, Mark Levine, who could offer nothing but a helpless shrug. Miller was on his own, cornered by his own lies. "The video doesn't show everything," he mumbled, his blustering authority gone, replaced by a sullen defensiveness. "The situation was tense. My perception was that he was being aggressive." "Your perception?" Lena honed in on the word. "So it is no longer a matter of fact, but a matter of your subjective perception? A perception that led you to write a false statement in an official police report? Perjury is a serious crime, officer." "Objection," Levine finally piped up, his voice lacking conviction. "Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Judge Thompson said, though his eyes, narrowed and sharp, remained fixed on Miller. "Watch yourself, Mrs. Jackson." Lena gave a slight nod, having already made her point. She turned back to Miller. "Let's talk about your perception, then. When you arrived, did you attempt to de-escalate the situation? Did you try to ascertain the facts from anyone other than Ms. Peterson?" "I assessed the situation as it was presented to me. The manager wanted him to leave. He refused. It's simple trespassing." "Did you speak to my son? Did you ask him his side of the story?" "He was agitated. Speaking with him would have been unproductive." "Unproductive? Or inconvenient for a quick and simple arrest?" Lena paused, letting the question hang. Officer Miller, are you aware of the Atlanta Police Department's implicit bias training program implemented last year? Miller shifted uncomfortably. I am aware of it. Have you completed it? Yes. And what did you learn from this training? To be aware of unconscious biases. Exactly. Unconscious biases. The kind of biases that might cause an officer to perceive a calm, well-spoken black teenager in a robotics club hoodie as aggressive and intimidating, while taking the word of a frantic manager at face value, without any corroborating evidence. The kind of biases that lead to false arrests and fabricated police reports. The words landed like hammer blows. Lena wasn't just defending Darius anymore. She was putting the entire system on trial. She had skillfully used the department's own training program against its officer. Having thoroughly dismantled Miller's credibility, she turned her attention back to Karen Peterson, who was recalled to the stand. Ms. Peterson, Lena began again, let's return to the moment of the arrest. You saw Officer Miller place my son in handcuffs and lead him from your store. Yes, Karen said, her voice much smaller now. And how did you feel in that moment? I felt relieved. The situation was resolved. Did it occur to you that you had just set in motion a chain of events that could irrevocably alter the course of a young man's life? A young man whose only crime was buying a coffee and waiting for his friends? He shouldn't have argued with me, Karen insisted, clinging to her narrative. So, in your view, a black customer is not allowed to question a manager's arbitrary and discriminatory enforcement of a non-existent rule. It wasn't discriminatory, wasn't it? Lena took a step closer. Ms. Peterson, are you aware that the Daily Grind's corporate headquarters is in Seattle, a city known for its progressive values? Are you aware of their extensive corporate policy on diversity and inclusion, which explicitly states, and I quote, any act of discrimination by an employee, perceived or otherwise, will be met with immediate and decisive action up to and including termination. Karen paled. I was just doing my job. Your job is to sell coffee, Ms. Peterson, not to police the presence of black teenagers in your establishment. You made a choice. You chose to see my son not as a customer, but as a threat. You chose to escalate, to call the police, to lie about him being aggressive. And now here we are. Lena turned to face the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution has presented a case built on the discriminatory perception of a manager and the perjured testimony of a police officer. They have presented no credible evidence that a crime was committed. In fact, the only crime clearly documented here is the one committed by Officer Miller when he filed a false report. We move for a full and immediate dismissal of all charges against my son, Darius Jackson. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his brow furrowed. He looked from Lena to Levine, then to Officer Miller, and finally, his gaze rested on Darius. The viral video had shown a clear injustice, but the testimony had laid bare the rot beneath it. Prejudice, lies, and an abuse of authority. The courtroom held its breath. Levine stood to argue against the dismissal, but his words were weak, a half-hearted defense of a case that was bleeding out on the courtroom floor. Judge Thompson held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at the evidence, at the faces in his courtroom. He was clearly troubled. A motion for dismissal is a serious matter, he said slowly, his voice grave. Before I make my ruling, I want to hear from the defendant himself. Mr. Jackson, would you like to make a statement? Darius's heart leapt into his throat. All eyes were on him. His mother gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. This was it. This was his chance. He had been coached, of course. His mother had prepared him for this possibility, but as he stood up, he felt a surge of clarity. He knew exactly what he needed to say. It was time to reveal the one piece of evidence no one in the room had seen. Darius stood, his hands clasped behind his back to still their trembling. The entire courtroom was fixed on him. Judge Thompson's stern gaze, the prosecutor's anxious curiosity, Karen's fearful glare, and Officer Miller's simmering hostility. He felt the weight of their expectations, their preconceived notions of who he was. A victim, a troublemaker, a statistic. He was about to prove them all wrong. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room before they landed with unwavering intensity on Officer Miller. "Your Honor," Darius began, his voice clear and steady, surprising even himself. "My mother has already proven that I wasn't being disorderly. The video shows I was calm. She's proven that Ms. Peterson discriminated against me, and she's proven that Officer Miller lied in his report and on the stand." He paused, letting the summary of his mother's meticulous work settle in the room. "But there's something else. Something that wasn't on the video. Something that Officer Miller knows, but conveniently left out of his report." A murmur went through the courtroom. Lena Jackson looked at her son, a hint of confusion in her otherwise composed expression. This was not what they had rehearsed. Darius was going off script. "Officer Miller," Darius said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "When you had me pressed against the window to handcuff me, what did I say to you?" Officer Miller scoffed. "You were spouting nonsense. Something about your rights." "No," Darius said, his voice dropping, becoming more pointed, more precise. "That's not what I said. I spoke to you very clearly and quietly, so only you could hear. I asked you a question." He took a step away from the defendant's table, moving slightly toward the center of the room. "And now I'm going to ask it again, in front of everyone." He raised his right hand, not in a fist of anger or a gesture of surrender, but with his index finger extended. He pointed it directly at Officer Miller. The gesture was electric, a bolt of lightning in the staid courtroom. "Officer Miller," Darius projected, his voice echoing slightly. "Do you not recognize me?" Miller stared back, his face a mask of contemptuous confusion. "Recognize you? You're the kid from the coffee shop, the perpetrator." "No," Darius said, shaking his head slowly, a sad, knowing smile touching his lips. "That's not where you know me from. We met 2 months ago, on a Saturday, at the annual Atlanta PD Fallen Officers fundraiser and barbecue." The air was sucked out of the room. Officer Miller's face went from pink to a blotchy white. His swagger evaporated, replaced by a sudden, stark fear. Darius didn't let up. He kept his finger pointed, a metaphorical spear pinning Miller to his chair. "You were working the grill. I was there with my family. You served me a hot dog. You commented on my robotics club t-shirt. You asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I told you I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. You clapped me on the shoulder and said, 'That's great, son. Reach for the stars.'" He let the memory hang in the air, a ghost of a friendlier past now haunting the present. "But you don't remember that, do you? Because I was just a kid at a barbecue. I wasn't a perpetrator. I wasn't a threat. I was just a kid." He lowered his hand and turned to Judge Thompson, whose face was a study in astonishment. "Your Honor, the reason I was at that fundraiser, the reason my family has attended every year for the past decade, is because my uncle, Sergeant David Jackson, was an Atlanta PD officer. He was killed in the line of duty 11 years ago." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Lena Jackson's eyes glistened with unshed tears, her fierce composure finally breaking as she looked at her son with overwhelming pride. "My uncle's picture hangs on a memorial wall at the precinct where Officer Miller works," Darius continued, his voice thick with emotion but unwavering. "I've seen it 100 times. I see Officer Miller's picture on the Officer of the Month plaque right next to it. And when he was cuffing me, when he was treating me like I was less than human, I looked him right in the eye and I asked him, 'Don't you recognize Sergeant Jackson's nephew?' He turned back to Miller, whose face had crumpled. The lie wasn't just in the report anymore. It was in the profound moral failure of his memory, his recognition, his humanity. "He heard me, Your Honor," Darius stated, his voice now a powerful indictment. "He heard me. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw it in his eyes. He remembered. And then, he chose to forget. He chose to continue the arrest. Because admitting he knew who I was, that he knew my family, a Gold Star police family, would have made his perception of me as a threat impossible to justify. It would have exposed his prejudice for what it was, right there in that coffee shop. The twist was devastating. It wasn't just that the arrest was wrong. It was a deep, personal betrayal of the very community the officer claimed to serve and protect. It was a desecration of a fallen officer's memory. Judge Thompson was speechless. He stared at Darius, then at the utterly broken Officer Miller. He looked at the prosecutor, who looked as if he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. The case wasn't just falling apart anymore. It had been annihilated, blown to dust by a truth so powerful and so personal it was undeniable. "This court is in recess," Judge Thompson finally managed to say, his voice raspy. He slammed his gavel down, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Counsel will meet me in my chambers, immediately." He stood, his robes swirling, and stormed off the bench, but not before giving Officer Miller a look of such profound disgust that it was a verdict in itself. The case wasn't just going to be dismissed. Darius's revelation had changed everything. The judge wasn't just going to reopen the case, he was going to launch an inquisition. The judge's chambers were tense enough to feel like a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. Judge Thompson, his face a thundercloud, sat behind his massive oak desk, a stark contrast to his usual unflappable demeanor. Lena and Darius stood on one side, Mark Levine and a now perspiring Officer Miller on the other. "Mr. Levine," the judge began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "What in God's name was that?" Levine, pale and shaken, could only stammer. "Your Honor, I was unaware of these circumstances." "Unaware? Or did you fail to do your due diligence?" Thompson retorted. "Did you at any point look into the background of the young man your office is attempting to prosecute? Did it not occur to you to question the flimsy, contradictory narrative provided by your star witness, who I now believe has perjured himself in my courtroom?" He turned his wrathful gaze on Officer Miller. "And you stood there, under oath, and you lied. You lied about the events, and you lied by omission. You deliberately concealed your prior knowledge of Mr. Jackson and his family's connection to your own department. You dishonored the memory of a fallen brother officer to cover up a wrongful arrest motivated by, what? Laziness? Prejudice? You tell me." Officer Miller, stripped of his authority and uniform's protection, seemed to shrink. "Your Honor, it was a chaotic situation. I didn't make the connection until later." "Until the boy pointed at you in a court of law?" Thompson roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "I don't believe you. Not for a second." The consequences were swift and decisive. Back in the courtroom, Judge Thompson made his ruling. "All charges against Mr. Darius Jackson are dismissed with prejudice," he announced, the legal term meaning they could never be brought again. "This case is a gross miscarriage of justice." But he didn't stop there. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice booming through the now packed courtroom, which included several reporters who had been tipped off, "based on the testimony and evidence presented here today, this court is officially opening a judicial inquiry into the conduct of Officer Frank Miller. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation into perjury and filing a false police report. I am also formally requesting that the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division launch a full investigation into this officer's history and the department's training and protocols regarding bias." A wave of shock and excitement rippled through the gallery. This was no longer just a viral moment. It was a systemic earthquake. The corporate fallout for the daily grind was just as seismic. The news of Darius being the nephew of a fallen APD hero was the final nail in the coffin of their public image. It transformed the narrative from a simple case of racial profiling into a story of a corporation disrespecting a police family. The irony was devastatingly potent. The Daily Grind's corporate office in Seattle went from panic mode to full-blown meltdown. Their stock, which had wobbled, now took a significant plunge. Calls for a national boycott intensified. Major investors began expressing deep concern. Their CEO, a man named Brian Westfield, who cultivated an image of a progressive, socially conscious leader, was forced to fly to Atlanta. His first act was to publicly fire Karen Peterson. His second was to issue a deeply apologetic video statement, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. He announced the immediate and permanent closure of the Buckhead location. "There is no place for discrimination at the Daily Grind," Westfield declared. "We have failed. We failed Darius Jackson. We failed the Atlanta community, and we failed to live up to our own values." He announced a series of sweeping changes, mandatory, company-wide retraining on implicit bias and de-escalation, a new zero-tolerance policy for discrimination with an anonymous reporting hotline for employees and customers, and the establishment of a multi-million-dollar foundation to support educational and community programs for at-risk youth in Atlanta, to be overseen by a board of community leaders. For Lena and Darius, the days following the hearing were a whirlwind. Their story was now front-page news, not just a viral video. Lena was hailed as a legal titan, Darius as a courageous young hero. They were invited onto national news programs, their story becoming a focal point in the ongoing national conversation about race and policing. The investigation into Officer Miller began immediately. Internal Affairs seized his records, and what they found was disturbing. Miller had a history of complaints against him for excessive force and racially biased policing, all of them previously dismissed with a slap on the wrist. His perception had been harming the black community for years. Darius was just the first person with the platform and the resources to effectively fight back. The unraveling of authority was absolute. Karen Peterson, once the queen of her small cafe kingdom, became a pariah, unemployable, and infamous. Officer Miller, once a symbol of power and control, was suspended without pay, his badge and gun confiscated, facing the grim reality of criminal charges and the end of his career. The Daily Grind, a behemoth of the coffee industry, was brought to its knees, forced into a humiliating and expensive public penance. One evening, watching the news report on the newly announced corporate foundation, Darius turned to his mother. "Did we win?" he asked, the question laced with the exhaustion of the past few weeks. Lena put an arm around him, pulling him close. "We won this battle, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The war for true justice is much, much longer. But today, we made a difference. You made a difference." The system that had tried to crush him was now being forced to change, one painful public step at a time. The wheels of justice, once kick-started by Darius's courageous stand, began to grind with inexorable force. The reckonings for Karen Peterson and Frank Miller were no longer theoretical. They became stark, public realities. Karen's downfall was swift and isolating. Fired from the Daily Grind, she found herself in a digital stockade. Her name and face were synonymous with a particularly ugly brand of bigotry. Attempts to scrub her presence from the internet were futile. The video was everywhere, a permanent stain on her reputation. She tried to find work, but a simple Google search by any potential employer ended the conversation. She was forced to sell her condo in a pricey part of town and move to a small, anonymous apartment complex outside the city. Her friends, many of them from the same affluent social circles that patronized the Daily Grind, quietly distanced themselves. Her plight was a cautionary tale whispered at brunches and cocktail parties, the woman who picked the wrong teenager to harass. There was no lawsuit against her. Lena Jackson had made a strategic decision to focus on the systemic issues, but the court of public opinion had delivered a life sentence of infamy. Officer Frank Miller's fate was far more formal and severe. The district attorney's office, under immense public pressure and armed with the undeniable evidence from the video and Judge Thompson's scathing referral, moved forward with criminal charges. Miller was indicted by a grand jury for perjury and filing a false police report. He was forced to turn himself in, suffering the indignity of being booked and processed in the very same precinct where he had once been a senior officer. His mugshot, a picture of a defeated, broken man, became another viral image in the ongoing saga. His union provided a lawyer, but the case was hopeless. The video was the silent, unimpeachable witness against him. Facing a near-certain conviction and jail time, Miller accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of filing a false report, a misdemeanor, in exchange for his testimony against the systemic issues within the department. The perjury charge, a felony, was dropped. The deal required him to surrender his peace officer certification, permanently banning him from ever working in law enforcement in the state of Georgia again. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a court-mandated course in racial sensitivity. For a man who had built his identity around the authority of his badge, the punishment was a complete dismantling of his life. Miller's testimony in the internal affairs investigation, however, created the most significant ripples. He became the insider who, in saving himself, exposed the rot. He spoke of an unspoken culture, the us versus them mentality, the informal quotas that encouraged arrests for minor infractions like trespassing, and the way officers would cover for each other by corroborating flimsy reports. He admitted that bias was not just unconscious, but often a conscious shortcut in policing high-income areas. His confession, combined with the discovery of his past complaints, forced the hand of the new police chief, a reformer who had been looking for the political capital to make sweeping changes. Citing the Jackson case, the chief announced the Sergeant David Jackson Accountability Initiative, named in honor of Darius's uncle, a move suggested by Lena to turn their family's pain into a positive legacy. The initiative was substantial. It mandated that any arrest stemming from a third-party complaint, like a manager calling about a customer, would require corroborating evidence or a supervisor's approval, ending the practice of single-source arrests for minor offenses. It overhauled the implicit bias training, making it an interactive, ongoing program rather than a one-time seminar. Most importantly, it created a new, independent civilian oversight board with the power to investigate and recommend discipline for officer misconduct, giving the community a real voice for the first time. The ripple effects were changing the very structure of the Atlanta Police Department. Meanwhile, the Daily Grind's penance tour was in full swing. Their new foundation, in consultation with community leaders including Lena Jackson, announced its first major project, funding a state-of-the-art STEM center for Atlanta's inner-city schools, complete with a robotics lab. They named it the Darius Jackson Innovation Hub. Darius, initially hesitant to have his name on a building, was persuaded by his parents that it would inspire other kids. He agreed to serve on the Youth Advisory Board. The company also rewrote its policies. The loitering rule was abolished. Now, any customer could stay as long as they liked, no further purchase necessary. It was a small change with a huge symbolic meaning. The coffee shops began to feel different, more open. The baristas received new training. The Daily Grind was spending tens of millions of dollars to fix a problem that would have cost Karen Peterson nothing to avoid with simple human decency. Darius watched all of this unfold with a sense of awe. His single moment of standing up for himself had become a catalyst for profound change. The consequences weren't just about punishment. They were about rebuilding. The downfall of his antagonists wasn't an end in itself, but the necessary clearing of ground so that something better could be planted in its place. Months later, the autumn chill had given way to the cool promise of a Georgia spring. The media frenzy had subsided, replaced by the quiet, steady work of implementing the changes that had been promised. For Darius, life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it was a new normal, one shaped and defined by the fire he had walked through. He got his acceptance letter to Georgia Tech's aerospace engineering program. He celebrated not with a big party, but with a quiet family dinner. His father, home on leave, raised a glass of sparkling cider. To Darius, Colonel Jackson said, his voice thick with pride. Who showed more courage in a coffee shop than some soldier show in a lifetime? You didn't just stand up for yourself, son. You stood up for the idea of what this country is supposed to be. The legal case against Officer Miller concluded with his sentencing. There was no triumphalism for the Jackson family, only a somber sense of closure. Lena made a statement to the press afterward. This was never about revenge, she said, with Darius by her side. It was about accountability. Accountability is the foundation of trust between our communities and law enforcement. Today, a piece of that foundation was repaired. One of the most surreal moments came a few weeks later. Darius was giving a tour of his high school's robotics lab to a representative from the Daily Grind's new community foundation. They were discussing the grant for the Innovation Hub. The representative, a kind woman named Maria, listened intently as Darius explained the intricacies of their latest competition robot. You have a real gift for this, she said, genuinely impressed. Thanks. I just like building things, Darius replied. You know, Maria said carefully, our CEO, Brian Westfield, he asked me to personally extend an invitation. He wants to know if you would be willing to meet with him. He wants to apologize to you face to face. Darius considered it. A part of him wanted nothing to do with the company or the man who ran it. But another part, the part that had found its voice in that courtroom, knew it was an opportunity. Okay, he said. But not in his office, and not here. The meeting took place at a small, family-owned coffee shop in Darius's own neighborhood of Grant Park, a place where the owner knew his name and his usual order. Brian Westfield, the powerful CEO, looked out of place in his tailored suit, sitting at a wobbly table. He looked tired, older than he did in his corporate videos. Darius, he began, I know words are insufficient, but I need to say it. I am profoundly sorry for what our company, our employee, put you through. It was inexcusable. It was a failure at every level. Darius listened, nodding slowly. He didn't need the apology, not anymore, but he recognized the importance of Westfield making it. I appreciate that, Darius said. But what I really want to know is this for real? All the changes? The foundation? Or is it just good PR to save your stock price? Westfield met his gaze. It started as damage control, he admitted with surprising honesty. But this experience, seeing your courage, seeing the systemic issues we were complicit in, it changed us. It changed me. We're spending $100 million on these initiatives. You can't fake that. We're trying to build a better company, a more perfect grind. They talked for over an hour. Darius spoke about his experiences, about the subtle and overt racism young black men face every day. Westfield listened. He truly listened. By the end, a strange, tentative understanding had been reached. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was an acknowledgement of harm done and a commitment to do better. A year later, Darius was a freshman at Georgia Tech, excelling in his classes. The Darius Jackson Innovation Hub had its grand opening at his old high school. He was there to cut the ribbon, alongside the mayor and a still apologetic Brian Westfield. The new robotics lab was filled with eager students, their faces alight with possibility. He saw the ripple effect of his stand every day. He heard stories of the new civilian oversight board successfully holding other officers accountable. He saw the Daily Grind commercials featuring diverse faces and promoting community events. It wasn't perfect. The world hadn't been magically cured of its prejudice. But a tangible shift had occurred. A precedent had been set. His lasting message came not from a speech or an interview, but from his actions. He mentored the younger kids at the Innovation Hub. He spoke to student groups about civic engagement. He showed them that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. It was about knowing your worth, even when the world tries to devalue you. It was about speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes. Standing up for what's right doesn't always change the world overnight. But sometimes, in a coffee shop, in a courtroom, in a quiet conversation, it can change a company, a police department, and a city. It can create a more perfect grind, building a future where a kid can study for his physics test in peace, judged not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character and the boundless reach of his dreams. In the end, Darius Jackson's story became more than just a viral moment of injustice. It transformed into a powerful testament to the impact one voice can have when it dares to speak truth to power. His courage didn't just win a court case, it exposed the deep cracks in the systems meant to protect us, forcing a reckoning that led to real, tangible change. From the boardrooms of a corporate giant to the precinct houses of the Atlanta PD, the ripples of his stand are still being felt. This story is a reminder that accountability is not given, it is demanded, and that true justice requires not just outrage, but unwavering resolve. If Darius's story moved you, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss a story about courage, change, and the fight for a better world.